I'm replacing this gate with the 3.6 meter one that I'll make in this video. It's going to be a traditional style and it's lighter than I originally planned, so while I don't think it'll sag, there's a real possibility it may have too much flex, but we'll have to see. It's done its job, but it's a bit beat up and it's not the nicest thing to look at. I have made a steel gate here before alongside an experienced blacksmith, but this one's very different and I'm on my own this time. It'll have some welding, but it'll be mainly held together with lots of rivets and some tenon joinery. I also need to make a latch, hinges and install it. It's a pretty big undertaking, but let's get into it and see how it goes. I'll start with the top rail. I'll make that from 25mm or 1-inch angle iron. The first thing I'll do is form a slight curve along the length of it, which I'll do using the fly press. I've done this a few times in the past, but not with angle iron, so while I'm fairly confident it will work, I'm not 100% sure. To help keep it straight, I've welded a couple of pieces of flat bar to the front of the jig. The most important thing with this method to get a consistent bend is the stop on the top of the fly press. This limits the travel so I can't get heavy-handed and put a kink in the middle of the rail. Before I start bending it, I'll mark the curve that I need on the floor so I've got something to gauge it against. I'll be making a pass along the whole length of the rail, check it against these marks and then adjust the stop slightly, make another pass and so on until I creep up on the correct curve. I'll mark increments as I go, which will also keep the curve nice and consistent. It's not much of a bump with the stop set, but it'd be very easy to bend it too far in one pass. This is the way to go, just a little at a time. That's nowhere near enough, but that's okay. I'll set the stop and go again. I'm only showing one more pass, but it did take 3 to get it just right. Next, I'll cut the bottom rail and the uprights to make up the frame. These pieces will be joined with mortice and tenons, and I'll start by marking out the tenons on the ends of the bottom rail. Just so I don't upset anyone, I'm using my good calipers to set these old broken ones, which I'll then use to scribe. I cut them pretty close to the lines, but they still need finishing with a hand file. I'm aiming to get these really quite accurate. That's one end done, now for the other. The curved top rail will also need tenons, but I'll put that aside for now and start on the mortices in the uprights. There's actually quite a few, 9 on each upright, and they'll be for all these pieces which also come through the angle. I've worked out the position of each, so I'll mark those out next. I've marked the centres of each mortise along the angle. Now I need to mark the centres across, and because the pieces making up the middle of the gate will be layered, the position of the mortises change with different pieces. Now I have the centres, I'll mark out where I need to drill. The holes need to be 7mm apart, so I'm using a 3.5mm drill bit to set the dividers. I'm using my Niroc Auto Center Punch, which is awesome and carbide tipped. I decided to mark out which way the mortises go, some along the upright and some across, and I did that because I've already marked some out the wrong way around. All of the steel for this project, including the angle, is 5mm thick, so I'm using a 5mm drill bit for the mortises. I could cut the centres out by hand, and there'll be more later which I'll do like that, but as these uprights are a manageable size, I'll use the milling machine. I'll square up the corners by hand, which will only take a few minutes with a good file. The other option would be to round over the tenons to fit the mortises. There's one more thing to do to get a good fit. Because the inside of the angle has a radius, I need to make clearance for it on the end of the rail. That fits great. I'll do the other end and move on to the next stage. I could fit the top rail now, but it will be easier after I've added the next pieces, the 6 horizontals. These will be made from 25 by 5mm flat bar, and when they're all fitted, they'll square up the frame, making it easier to cut the top rail to the correct length and fit it. They're a bit floppy to deal with, especially when trying to clamp them together to cut them in one go. As they need to be the same length as the bottom rail, I'll use that as a guide. Next I'll cut tenons, and again I'll use the bottom rail as a guide. This is an exciting part of the project. When the horizontals are fitted, I'll have a panel which will start to feel like I'm getting somewhere. These ones are a bit more straightforward than the ones on the rails and won't take too long to do. That's all of the tenons done on both ends, so I'll start to fit them into the mortises with a bit of filing. They almost fit, they just need a bit taken off here and there. I did think about just welding the ends inside the rail. It would have been much quicker and easier and wouldn't have been too obvious, but I've always wanted to construct something with this method. It's a bit old school and pretty cool. Now the one end is done, I'll flip everything around and do the other end. Next I'll fit the top rail, but first I'll make sure that it's square by measuring across the diagonals. They're equal in both directions, so that means it's square. I'll clamp things down and cut the top rail to length. I'm just lining up the top of the rail to the upper part of the mortise that I've already cut ready to accept it. Then I'm clamping it down on both ends before marking it. I also need to allow for a tenon, so I'll mark that out now. That's the first end done, and just like the bottom rail, they also need rounding over to allow for that inside radius on the upright. One more thing I'll do is bend the tenon so it sits perpendicular to the upright. This will make it easier to assemble when we come to it. That's now a full panel, so I'll move on to the next pieces, which are diagonals and a centre upright. These are made from the same flat bar as the horizontals. After finding the centre of the gate, I'm marking the centre piece to length and adding 30mm for tenons. That's 15mm for each tenon, 5 for the thickness of the rail that it passes through, leaving 10mm, which is twice the thickness of the tenon material, and that's just the right amount for when they get peened. Next I'll make mortices in the rails, and as I mentioned earlier, I'll do these without the milling machine. To cut between the drilled holes, I've ground down a piece of hacksaw blade. I still need to fit the diagonals, but first I'll join the centre and horizontals together. They will get riveted, but that will be later on. For now, I'll drill holes and just bolt them together. Before I do that, I'll check the whole thing again to make sure it's square. I'll be bolting the whole thing together before adding any rivets, and when I come to that, I'll remove one bolt at a time, rivet that joint, and so on. Now for the diagonals, which is basically the same as what I've already been doing, it's just that the tenons are on an angle. The diagonals aren't just for looks, they brace the whole panel, which should prevent the gate from sagging. There'll also be an arc, which I'll make in the next step, and that will also brace the gate as well. Now they're fitted, I'll drill and bolt them to the horizontals. As I mentioned earlier, I could have welded all of these pieces together, but this is more traditional, and it's the small details like the rivets and the tenons that elevate the project. Next I'll make the arc, and like the top rail I bent earlier, I'll do that on the fly press. First I need to flip the gate over as the arc will be fixed to the other side of the horizontals. I've decided to weld supports to the bending jig, which will hopefully prevent the flat bar from flopping around too much and keep it upright. I've said it many times before, but I think the fly press really is my favourite tool. It's so versatile and always satisfying to use. There's just enough clearance through the door. If it hadn't have worked out like that, I would have unbolted the stand from the floor and moved it closer to the doorway. That's what I expected, but it just about worked out. That was pretty lucky. It was only one pass and it fits just about perfect. If anything, just slightly overbent, but hardly at all, so I can just spring it back when I bolt it in place. I'll clamp it in position and cut it to length. I'm keeping any welding to a minimum, and the arc will get riveted across the horizontals, but I will weld the ends to the inside of the frame. Kath gave me a hand to take the gate outside to give me more room for the next step, which is forging the scrolls. The scrolls will be formed from the top of the uprights, and being angle iron, I really don't know how well this will go. If they don't work out and they're a bit of a mess, I'll chop the top off the uprights, forge separate scrolls from solid bar and weld them on. I've made this jig ready to bend the angle, and hopefully it'll keep it from deforming too much and keep the angle iron's cross section in shape. I was a bit clumsy on that first heat, but now I have more idea what to expect. I'll put it back in the forge and try again. There will be another part to the scroll that I'll forge from solid bar, and that will have to be welded to this piece. I wanted a unique design, which I'm not 100% sure I got quite right, and maybe not truly traditional either, but I quite like them. You'll have to let me know what you think when I've completed the full scroll. It's taken a few heats, but it's working well. Now I need to do the other side and hopefully get it to somewhat match the first one. I reckon that went pretty well, definitely better than I thought it would. Next I'll refit the upright to the gate and trim some excess off the scroll. It just needs a bit of tweaking, but looking good. I've decided to taper out the scroll, which I'll do by grinding it back. This will be a better match to the piece that I'll forge next that gets welded to it. This is the piece I'll forge, and I'll do that from this scrap of 25mm round bar, and this should be enough to get the two pieces that I need. I'll start by squaring it up first on the fly press, and then I'll start to taper it down. I've changed the dies to start drawing out the bar. Now that I've drawn it out a bit, I'll move on to the power hammer. It's only a very small power hammer, 9 kilograms. Each blow would be similar to what you could do yourself with a hand hammer, but this is relentless and much easier. I haven't used it heaps, so still getting the hang of it. I'm just about there. I'll heat it once more. With the stop set on the fly press and flat dies, I'll make sure that it's a consistent width. It still needs bending into shape, but I'll chop it off and get the other side to the same stage. To bend them, I'll use the fly press again and bend them cold. I'm just doing this by eye until I think it looks right. I'm checking over each piece separately, making sure that it has a nice flowing curve. They're ready to attach, and while I have the welder set up, I'll also weld the few of the sections I need to do, like on the top and bottom rails. The tenon fixes the one side of the angle, and the other I could put a rivet through, but I don't want rivets on the frame, so I'll run a small weld bead, which will be hardly noticeable. The top of the arc also needs a small weld, then the scrolls, and that's it. Kath helped me take it back outside. There isn't too much to grind, but I'd rather keep some of the dust out of the workshop. By the way, the gate has a bit of weight to it, but it's not crazy. I worked it out to be 52 kilograms. It's looking pretty good. I'll get back inside and start peening the tenons. To heat it, I'll use my LPG and compressed air torch. This thing's awesome when you don't have an oxy setup. It doesn't get anywhere near as hot as oxyacetylene or oxy-LPG, but it's great for small tasks like this and it's cheap to run. If you're interested, I got mine from Gamico Artisan Supplies. I've been looking forward to peening these, probably my favourite part of the project. I reckon they look great. It was definitely worth it, and honestly the mortise and tenons didn't actually take that long. Obviously longer than welding, but I know which I prefer. Now for the rivets, they weren't the easiest thing to get hold of, but I bought these mushroom head ones online. I wanted flat ones, I couldn't find any, so I'm going to machine a flat on each one. I only need 32, I will do a few spares as well, so they won't take too long on the lathe. The rivets are 1/4 inch, just slightly too big to go through the 6mm hole that I drilled for the bolts, so I need to drill those through with a 1/4 inch bit. I could have just drilled the 1/4 inch holes in the first place, but I didn't want the bolts to be sloppy. I wanted to keep everything tight so all the braces were in exactly the right position. I bought this cheap air hammer to fix the rivet, so let's give it a go. It's doing it, but not as well as I thought it would. It took 3 goes and it doesn't look particularly good either, so I'll try doing them by hand with a regular hammer. I think that looks much better, so I'll ditch the air hammer and do them all by hand. That's the go, it's easier and I can do them in one heat. I'm getting a bit of a system going, I'm really enjoying it, and I'll have to make more projects with rivets in the future. That's one half done. I'll shift the table over and do the other side. There hasn't been a heap of room in here while making the gate. It really is pretty big, but I've just about managed. That's almost all of them. I just need a rivet through each of the scrolls. We took it outside to take a better look at it, and I have been looking at it for a few days now, not liking these open areas in the design, so I'm thinking about adding another rail. I'm clamping some flat bar on so I can stand back and take a better look at it before committing, and I reckon it looks much better. I'll cut a piece of flat bar and quickly get on with it and fit it again with a mortise and tenon. I've just realised when I welded this on from the back, I've actually made it flush. It's supposed to be stepped back 5 mm, so I'll grind off the welds and fix it in the correct position. Now the new rail sits correctly in front of the centre upright and behind the arc. If I hadn't re-welded the top of the arc, then things would have become twisted and the arc looks better set back from the top rail anyway. I've got the gate set upside down, ready to do one more thing. I've been concerned about the flex over the 3.6 metre span even before I started the build. The scrolls actually stiffen up the top rail quite a bit, but I've decided to also stiffen up the bottom rail. It would be okay as it is, but it could be better. To improve it, I'll weld a piece of 10 by 10 mm square bar to the front edge. This will make the angle into more of a T-section. It won't be symmetrical, but the two opposite sides should still work against each other and stiffen it up. When the square bar bends one way and goes into compression, the opposite side of the angle should counteract it and vice versa. At least I think it should. Also, I think the square bar will look fine. It may even make it look more interesting with another layer and more depth. I'm just welding it from the underneath, which I reckon will be fine. I really don't want any weld showing on the top. This way the rail will look like one piece and look nice and crisp. I reckon it looks great. I'm grinding the welds down slightly and cleaning off any weld spatter. I'm not going too far, just making sure that they're not at all visible. I planned on getting the whole thing done in one video, but there's still a lot left to do. There's hinges, forging a latch, and I'll also forge a catch to keep the gate in the open position. There's posts, fence panels, I need to paint it and install it, so I'll tackle those in a separate video. I'm very happy with it and I think the flex will be fine now. Hopefully when I install it, it doesn't sag too much being so wide. Anyway, hopefully you enjoy the video. Thanks for watching and I'll see you on the next one.